Welcome to a nightmare that began on an ordinary day. It started not with a scream, but with the quiet promise of a weekend away from the noise of the world, a promise that curdled into a silent, suffocating dread from which there would be no escape. The car smelled of stale coffee and the cheap pine air freshener Liam had hung from the rearview mirror. It spun lazily with every turn, a tiny green tree dancing on the road to damnation. Rain began to speckle the windshield, not a proper downpour, but a miserable, persistent drizzle that smeared the grey landscape. Chloe watched the water bead and race, each droplet a tiny world reflecting a distorted, colourless sky. She hugged her knees to her chest, the worn denim of her jeans feeling thin against the creeping chill. "Are you sure this is it?" Maya asked from the back seat, her voice tight with a skepticism she was failing to disguise as curiosity. She peered over Liam's shoulder, her glasses fogged at the edges. Liam's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He squinted at the GPS on his phone, mounted precariously to the dashboard. "The signal is getting spotty." But yes, the instructions said to follow the coastal road until it ends. This looks like an end to me. He was not wrong. The road, once a strip of respectable asphalt, had degraded into a gravel track pocked with muddy puddles. It terminated abruptly at a rickety wooden pier that jutted out into a churning expanse of slate-grey water. Beyond the pier, maybe half a mile out, a jagged black rock clawed its way out of the sea, and on top of it, stark and lonely against the horizon, stood the lighthouse. It was not the charming, rustic getaway depicted in the online listing. The photos had shown a bright, whitewashed tower under a brilliant blue sky, a beacon of quaint seclusion. The reality was a grim stone monolith, streaked with dark stains that looked like years of accumulated grime or permanent tears. It looked less like a holiday rental and more like a prison tower, abandoned to the elements. "Wow," Ben said from beside Maya, his usual levity sounding hollow. "It is atmospheric," he nudged his girlfriend. "Right, babe. Very gothic." Maya just grunted, her nose pressed against the window. Gothic does not quite cover it. More like derelict. Liam killed the engine. The sudden silence was immense, broken only by the spatter of rain on the car roof and the distant, mournful cry of a gull. For a moment, no one moved. They just stared at the stark silhouette on the rock, a silent sentinel guarding nothing but grey waves and an even greyer sky. This was supposed to be their escape. 4 friends, a remote lighthouse rented for a steal, a weekend of board games, good wine, and a break from the relentless demands of their lives. But looking at that tower, Chloe felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. It felt less like an escape and more like a trap. "All right," Liam announced, forcing a cheerful tone that fooled no one. He popped the trunk. "Mr. Henderson is supposed to meet us here. He said he would ferry us over." They climbed out of the car, the damp, salty air hitting them at once. It was cold, colder than it should have been for early autumn, with a biting wind that whipped Chloe's hair across her face and seemed to sink right into her bones. They pulled their bags from the trunk, the silence between them thick with an unspoken, collective disappointment. Ben was the first to break it, zipping up his jacket with a theatrical shiver. Okay, so the pictures were maybe a little photoshopped, or taken 30 years ago. Good lighting can do wonders. He tried a grin, but it did not reach his eyes. At least it is private. As if summoned by his words, a shape emerged from a small, dilapidated shack at the base of the pier. It was a man, old and stooped, his frame swallowed by a heavy, dark raincoat. He moved with a slow, stiff gait, his boots thudding a funereal rhythm on the weathered planks. He did not wave or call out a greeting. He just walked to the end of the pier where a small, grubby-looking motorboat bobbed in the water and waited. "Must be Mr. Henderson," Liam said, hefting 2 duffel bags. "Let us go." Try to look excited. They trudged onto the pier, the wood groaning under their weight. The old man watched them approach, his face a roadmap of deep-set wrinkles, his eyes lost in the shadow of a low-pulled hat. He was chewing on something, a slow, methodical grinding of his jaw. "Henderson?" Liam asked, setting the bags down. The old man spat a stream of brown tobacco juice into the water, narrowly missing the side of his boat. "Aye. You are the renters." It was not a question. His voice was a low rumble, like stones grinding together. "Got your supplies?" "No shops out there, no nothing out there." "All packed," Chloe said, forcing a smile that felt like a grimace. Henderson gave their pile of luggage a dismissive glance, then turned his attention to the lighthouse. His gaze lingered on it, and for a second, Chloe saw an expression cross his face she could not quite decipher. It looked like a mixture of resentment and something else. Fear. "Weather's turning," he grunted, looking back at them. "The moor gets hungry when the fog rolls in." "The moor?" Maya asked, her historian's curiosity piqued despite the grim atmosphere. "Is that what the locals call the channel?" Henderson let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh that held no humour. "It is what the rock is called. Black Maw Rock. It has been called that for 200 years. It is an apt name." "Get in," he said. "The tide is on the turn. We do not want to be out here when it gets mean." The journey across the channel was short but brutal. The small boat pitched and rolled, slapping against the waves with jarring force. A cold spray washed over the side, soaking their jeans and bags. No one spoke. The drone of the outboard motor was the only sound, a struggling, angry buzz against the vast empty noise of the sea and sky. As they drew closer, the lighthouse loomed larger, more intimidating. It seemed to grow out of the black rock like a malignant tumour, its stone surface slick and dark with sea spray. Chloe could now see the lantern room at the top, a cage of glass and iron that looked like a cyclops's eye, vacant and blind in the daylight. The dock was a precarious steel platform bolted directly into the rock face, with a steep set of stone stairs leading up. Henderson cut the engine, and the boat drifted into place with an expert nudge. He threw a rope around a cleat and secured it without a word. "She is all yours for the weekend," he said, his back to them as he began unloading their bags onto the platform. "Key is in the lockbox by the door. Codes in your email." He worked quickly, his movements efficient and tense, as if he could not wait to be rid of them and this place. Lights automated, Generators in the shed out back, but you should not need to touch it. Runs on a timer. Everything else is electric. Power comes from the mainland, mostly. He finished piling their things and then, without another word, stepped back into his boat. He did not offer a hand, nor did he wait to see them safely up the stairs. "Wait," Liam called out as the old man reached for the ignition cord. "When will you be back to pick us up?" "Sunday afternoon." Henderson paused. He looked up, not at Liam, but past him, at the heavy iron door of the lighthouse. "Sunday, 3 o'clock. Do not be late. I do not come out here after dark. Not for any price." He pulled the cord. The engine sputtered to life with a cough of blue smoke. As he steered the boat away from the rock, he shouted one last thing over the engine's roar, his words nearly snatched away by the wind. "And bolt the door at night. The sea gets restless." Then he was gone, a small boat shrinking into the grey mist, leaving the four of them alone on a slick black rock in the middle of the sea, the weight of the silence pressing in on them once more. The air inside the lighthouse was thick with the smells of cold stone, damp, and something else, a faint, briny odour of decay, like old seaweed left to rot. Despite the promise of modernization, the entrance hall was stark and utilitarian. A spiral staircase of cast iron dominated the space, winding its way up into the darkness of the tower above. The stone walls were bare and wept with condensation. "Well," Ben said, his voice echoing unnaturally in the enclosed space, "it has character." They found the living quarters on the second floor, a circular room that had been renovated with a strange mix of modern and rustic furniture. A sleek leather sofa sat uncomfortably beside a rough-hewn wooden table. A flat-screen television was mounted on a wall of exposed weeping stone. It was clear someone had tried to make the place habitable, but the oppressive atmosphere of the tower fought against it at every turn. The room was cold, a deep, penetrating cold that the single, humming electric heater in the corner could not seem to touch. Liam, ever the pragmatist, immediately started checking things. He flicked light switches, tested the taps in the small kitchenette, and fiddled with the thermostat. "Okay, so the power is on. Water pressure is decent. It is not the palace the website promised, but it is functional." Maya, meanwhile, had been drawn to a bookshelf, crammed with old, sea-stained paperbacks. Tucked between a worn copy of Moby Dick and a sailing almanac, she found a thick, leather-bound volume. It was a logbook. "Guys, look at this," she said, her voice hushed. She carried it over to the table, laying it down with a reverence that Chloe found unsettling. The cover was blank, the leather cracked and faded. She opened it carefully. The first several pages were filled with neat, looping cursive. The entries were dated, stretching back decades. They were mundane, almost painfully so. October 12th, 1958. Wind from the northeast. Repaired the gasket on the primary lens. Gulls are a menace. May 3rd, 1962. Supply boat arrived, brought fresh milk and mail. Weather fair. A keeper's log, Maya breathed, her historian's instincts overriding her earlier apprehension. "This is incredible," They gathered around the table, reading over her shoulder. For an hour, they lost themselves in the simple, lonely life of the men who had kept the light. They read about storms and solitude, about ships passing in the night, about the slow, steady rhythm of a life dictated by the sea and the lamp. It was Ben who noticed the change. "Whoa, hang on, look at this." He pointed to an entry about 3/4 of the way through the book. The handwriting, once so precise, had changed. It was still the same hand, but it was now a jagged, hurried scrawl. The ink was darker, pressed hard into the page. The date was September 21st, 1974. Fog came in sudden tonight, thickest I have ever seen. Cannot even see the rocks below. The light cannot cut it. It feels like being wrapped in cotton. The next entry was a few days later. Something is wrong with the fog. There is a sound in it. Not the foghorn, not the sea. A song, low and sweet. It makes my teeth ache. They fell silent, the cheerful atmosphere they had been trying to build evaporating like sea spray. Chloe felt a prickle of unease on the back of her neck. Maya turned the page. The entries became more sporadic, the writing more frantic. October 2nd, 1974. Saw it in the lens. As the beam passed over the water, a shadow under the waves moved too fast. October 5th, 1974. The singing will not stop. It is in the walls now. It is in my head. At night, I hear tapping on the glass of the lantern room, but there is nothing out there but the storm. October 9th, 1974. It is not the sea that is restless. It is what is in it. I boarded the lower windows. It wants in. It knows I am here. It sings my name. The final entry was a single sprawling sentence that filled the entire page, the pen having dug so deep it had torn through the paper in places. There was no date. The light is not enough. The light is not enough. It sees me through the light. I can hear it scraping on the rocks. It is climbing. The light is not enough. That was it. The rest of the pages were blank. A heavy silence descended on the room. Ben swallowed hard, his face pale. Okay. That is super creepy. Some old keeper losing his marbles from solitude, right? Probably, Liam said, but his voice lacked conviction. He closed the book with a decisive thud. Look, it is 100-year-old tower. It is bound to have some ghost stories. Let us not let it get to us. We are here to relax. But the spell was broken. The chill in the room seemed to have deepened. Every groan of the old tower, every gust of wind that rattled the window panes, now seemed menacing. Chloe walked over to one of the thick, curved windows and looked out. The drizzle had stopped, but the sky had darkened to a bruised purple. A thick bank of fog, the very same fog from the logbook, was rolling in from the sea, a solid wall of white that was steadily swallowing the horizon. The mainland was gone. They were completely, utterly alone. Henderson was right about the fog, she murmured. As if on cue, the single lamp on the table flickered. It went out, plunging the room into the deep gloom of the dying afternoon. A collective gasp. Then, just as suddenly, it flickered back on. Just a power surge, Liam said quickly, a little too quickly. Old wiring. Probably happens all the time, But Chloe's heart was hammering against her ribs. She thought of the final entry in the logbook. It knows I am here. They tried to recapture the mood of a holiday. They unpacked their food. Ben put on a playlist from his phone, and Liam broke out a bottle of wine. But the conversation was strained, punctuated by long silences. Every time the wind howled, they would all fall quiet, listening. Their eyes kept darting to the windows, to the thick, impenetrable fog that now pressed against the glass like a living thing. Night fell with a sudden, suffocating totality. According to the information Liam had received, the automated light was supposed to switch on at sunset, but the sun had set an hour ago, and the tower above them remained dark and silent. "I guess the timer is off," Liam said, frowning. "I am going to go up and see if there is a manual switch. It cannot be that complicated." "I will come with you," Chloe said immediately, not wanting to be left alone, not even with Ben and Maya. The spiral staircase was a black vortex. They used the flashlights on their phones to see, the narrow beams cutting sharp, dancing circles in the oppressive darkness. The air grew colder as they ascended, and the smell of ozone and old machinery grew stronger. The iron stairs rang with their footsteps, the sound alarmingly loud in the silence. The lantern room was at the very top, a circular chamber enclosed in a cage of glass panels. In the center, the great lens assembly sat inert and dark, a multifaceted glass heart that should have been beating with light. It was an antique marvel of brass and glass, though Liam pointed out a newer-looking electronic control box mounted on the wall beside it. "This must be it," he said, shining his light on the box. It had a simple toggle switch, currently in the off position. Weird. Why would it be off? He flipped it up. Nothing happened. He flipped it down and up again. Still nothing. The giant lamp remained dead. Damn it. The power must not be connected up here. Maybe it is a generator thing after all. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Okay, let us just go back down. We will call Henderson in the morning." But as he turned to go, Chloe froze. She was looking out through the glass, into the swirling fog. "Liam," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What was that?" "What was what?" He came to her side, pressing his face close to the cold glass. "I do not see anything. A light, out there, in the fog. It is probably just a boat, Chloe." "No, it was not on the water. It was up, level with us." They stood there for a long time, peering out into the blank whiteness, but there was nothing, just the endless, shifting fog. "Your eyes are playing tricks on you," Liam said gently, putting an arm around her. "It is spooky up here. Let us go down." As they reached the bottom of the stairs, a sound from above made them both freeze. A low, grinding groan. The sound of immense, ancient machinery reluctantly coming to life. It was followed by a hum, a deep, resonant vibration that they could feel through the soles of their feet. A brilliant, blinding white light flooded down the stairwell. They raced back to the living room to find Ben and Maya shielding their eyes. A powerful beam was sweeping past the windows, illuminating the swirling fog in a terrifying, ethereal glow. The light was on. "See? It was just on a different timer," Liam said, a relieved smile on his face, but his smile faded as they watched. A lighthouse beam is supposed to be steady, rhythmic, a predictable sweep that captains can time. This was not that. The beam moved in a jerky, unnatural rhythm. It would sweep halfway across the water, then stop. It would shudder, then race across the rest of its arc at double speed. And then it did something that made Chloe's blood run cold. It stopped moving altogether. The great, powerful beam froze, pointing directly at their window. It flooded the room with an intense, interrogating light, pinning them in its glare. It felt accusatory. It felt like an eye that was looking right at them. They stood paralyzed, like animals caught in headlights. For 10, 20, 30 seconds, it remained fixed on them. Then, with another mechanical groan, it lurched on, continuing its erratic, unpredictable journey through the fog. No one spoke. Ben's playlist had ended, and the only sound was the wind, the distant sea, and the unnerving hum and grind of the lamp above their heads. "I need a drink," Ben finally croaked, breaking the tension. "A real drink." He walked on unsteady legs to the kitchenette, fumbling in his bag for a bottle of whiskey he had packed. The others watched him go, still too stunned to move. They heard him open the bottle. They heard the clink of glass. Then they heard a different sound. A sharp, sudden gasp. It was followed by the shattering of glass as the bottle slipped from his hand and exploded on the stone floor. They rushed into the small kitchen alcove. Ben was standing there, his back pressed against the counter, his face as white as bone. He was shaking, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to have stolen his voice. His gaze was fixed on the small, round porthole window above the sink. "Ben? What is it? What is wrong?" Maya cried, grabbing his arm. He did not look at her. He just raised a trembling hand and pointed at the window. "A face," he whispered, his voice a raw, ragged thing. "I saw a face, looking in." Liam stepped forward, peering out the porthole. He saw nothing, absolutely nothing but the thick, swirling fog, illuminated by the lighthouse beam as it swept past again. "Ben, there is nothing there," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "It was there," Ben insisted, finally tearing his gaze from the window to look at them, his eyes wild, pale, and wet. "It was just hanging there in the fog, staring at me." "Ben, that is impossible," Liam said, trying to be the voice of reason. "We are on the second floor. That window is 20 feet, maybe 30 feet above the rocks. There is nothing out there but a sheer drop." But Chloe knew he was wrong. She looked from Ben's terrified face to the dark circular window, and then to the shattered glass and spreading puddle of whiskey on the floor. She believed him, and as the lighthouse beam once again swept past the window, she saw it too. Not a face, just a flicker of movement in the fog, and for a fraction of a second, a dark, wet handprint slick on the outside of the glass before it was erased by the running condensation. There was no rational explanation for the handprint, not 30 feet up the slick, sheer wall of a stone tower. Liam, his face pale in the gloom, kept repeating the word impossible, like a mantra, a desperate prayer to the god of logic. But the words sounded thin and hollow, stripped of all meaning in the face of Ben's raw terror and the chilling certainty in Chloe's eyes. The shattered whiskey bottle on the floor was a testament to a fear that was real, a fear that was sharp and immediate. "It was condensation," Liam said, his voice strained. He was not looking at Chloe, but at the dark porthole, as if willing it to provide a sane answer. The light hit it funny. It looked like a hand. "That is all." "And the face?" Maya asked, her arms wrapped tightly around a still shaking Ben. "Did the condensation look like a face too?" Liam had no answer for that. The four of them stood huddled in the small kitchenette, the sharp scent of alcohol and the cloying smell of the sea filling their lungs. The only sounds were the incessant whine of the wind and the rhythmic grinding hum of the lamp turning in its housing far above them. The erratic beam swept past, and for a second the porthole was a circle of brilliant swirling white. It was like looking into the heart of a blizzard. Then it passed, plunging them back into shadow. "Henderson," Chloe said, her voice barely a whisper. "He said to bolt the door." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. It was no longer a casual warning from a crusty local. It was a vital instruction. They were vulnerable. The thought of the heavy iron door on the ground floor, perhaps unlocked, perhaps easily opened, sent a fresh wave of ice through Chloe's veins. "He is right," Liam agreed, seizing on the practical task, a lifeline in a sea of encroaching madness. "We should have done it as soon as we got here." Leaving the mess of shattered glass on the floor, they moved as a group, a tight, fearful herd. No one wanted to be left behind, not even for a second. They descended the echoing iron staircase, their phone flashlights cutting feeble paths through the oppressive darkness of the tower's core. The ground floor was even colder than the living quarters, the stone walls slick with moisture. The air was heavy and stagnant. The entrance door was a monster. Thick black iron studded with rivets was set deep into the stone. It looked ancient and inviolable, a door built to withstand the rage of 100-year storm. A massive iron bolt, thick as a man's wrist, was set beside it in a heavy-duty slide. It was currently retracted. The door was unbolted. Liam put his shoulder to the bolt. It was stiff with age and disuse, coated in a fine layer of rust and salt. He grunted with effort, his muscles straining. Ben and Maya watched, their faces etched with anxiety, while Chloe held her phone aloft, its light trembling in her hand. With a final, agonized shriek of metal on metal, the bolt slid home. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, a final, definitive clang that seemed to shake the very foundations of the tower. It was the sound of a cage being locked. It was the sound of a tomb being sealed. For a moment, they all felt a flicker of relief. They were sealed in, safe, but the feeling was immediately soured by a new, more terrifying realization. They were also trapped. If anything should happen, if they needed to escape, there was no way out until Henderson returned on Sunday. The single, massive bolt had turned their refuge into a prison. They backed away from the door slowly, as if it might suddenly lash out at them. As they started back up the stairs, a new sound began. It was not loud. In fact, it was so subtle at first that Chloe thought it was just the vibration from the lamp mechanism. It was a low, resonant hum, a frequency that seemed to bypass her ears and sink directly into her bones. It was a physical sensation, a deep thrumming that made the fillings in her teeth ache, just as the logbook had described. "Do you feel that?" Maya whispered, her hand on the cold stone wall. Her eyes were wide. Liam stopped, halfway up the stairs. He frowned, tilting his head. "The generator?" "No," Ben said, his voice ragged. "No, it is not a machine." He was right. The sound, the vibration, it did not have the steady, mechanical rhythm of an engine. It was organic. It rose and fell in pitch, with a strange, mournful cadence. It was a song, a deep bass thrum that seemed to be coming from the very stone of the lighthouse itself. It was everywhere and nowhere at once, a melody of pure dread. They scrambled the rest of the way up the stairs and back into the relative safety of the living area. But there was no escaping the sound. It was in the walls, in the floor, a constant, unnerving presence. It made conversation impossible, its low thrumming filling every silence, worming its way into their thoughts. Liam tried to fight it. "Right," he announced with a forced, manic cheerfulness. "Board games," he said. "I brought Catan, who is up for a little friendly competition. We will forget all about this weird humming." However, the attempt at normalcy was pathetic. No one could concentrate. They sat around the rough wooden table, the game boards spread out between them, but their eyes kept darting towards the windows, towards the shadows in the corners of the room. The humming was a constant distraction, a background radiation of fear that set their nerves on edge. Every time the lighthouse beam swept past, it cast long, distorted shadows that writhed and danced on the walls, turning familiar shapes into monstrous caricatures. A coat hanging on a peg became a hunched figure. A stack of books became a jagged, leering face. An hour crawled by, each minute stretched to a painful eternity by the ceaseless vibrating song. Ben had given up any pretense of playing. He was sitting on the sofa, his knees drawn up to his chest, staring blankly at the floor. Maya was trying to read the keeper's log again, searching for clues, for anything that might explain what was happening, but her eyes were not focusing on the words. Chloe was absently twisting a loose thread on her sweater, the repetitive motion a small anchor in the rising tide of panic. Then came the tapping. It was a single, distinct rap. It sounded like a sharp fingernail tapping against glass. It came from the main window, the one facing the black, fog-shrouded sea. Everyone froze. Liam, who had been trying to explain the rules of road building, stopped mid-sentence. His mouth hung open. "What was that?" Maya breathed. "The wind," Liam said instantly. His voice was tight, a loose shutter, or a gull, but they all knew it was not a gull, not in this fog, not at this hour, and the sound had been too precise, too deliberate. They waited, their bodies rigid, their ears straining against the oppressive hum. For a full minute, there was nothing. Liam let out a shaky breath, a weak, relieved smile touching his lips. See, nothing. Tap. This time it came from a different window, the one on the opposite side of the circular room. It was just as sharp, just as clear. Something was moving out there. It was circling them. Ben let out a small, choked sob. "Okay," Liam said, his voice low and serious. The forced cheerfulness was gone, replaced by a grim resolve. "Nobody panic." Tap, tap. 2 quick raps, this time from the porthole in the kitchen. It was testing the perimeter. It was seeing where they were. Chloe's heart was a wild bird beating against the cage of her ribs. She could not breathe. The air in the room felt thick and heavy, as if the pressure was dropping before a storm. The low, vibrating song from the stones seemed to get louder, the cadence quickening and becoming more insistent. It was a sound of anticipation and of hunger. Then the tapping on the windows stopped. It was replaced by a new sound, a sound from below, from the ground floor, from the heavy iron door. It was a slow, deliberate scraping, the sound of metal on stone. Then the horrifying, unmistakable noise of something wet and heavy being dragged across the iron surface of the door itself. It was a sound full of effort, of immense weight. It was the sound of something climbing. I can hear it scraping on the rocks it is climbing. The words from the logbook screamed in Chloe's mind. It had finished climbing the rocks. Now it was climbing their door. "It is trying to get in," Ben whimpered, burying his face in Maya's shoulder. "It cannot," Liam said, but his eyes were wide with a terror that belied his words. "That door is solid iron. That bolt. Nothing could get through that." The scraping stopped. The sudden silence was somehow more terrifying than the noise had been. They held their breath, waiting. The humming from the walls continued, a deep, ominous pulse. The lighthouse beam swept past the window, a silent, sweeping gaze. And then the sound changed. It was no longer a scraping. It was a fumbling, a wet, slick sound. It was followed by a sharp, metallic clatter. The handle. It was trying the handle. A slow, rhythmic rattling began. The heavy iron ring handle on the outside of the door was being lifted and dropped, lifted and dropped, a patient, methodical testing. It knew what a door was. It knew how to open it. Liam snapped. The carefully constructed walls of his pragmatism, of his relentless need for a rational explanation, came crashing down. "I have to see," he hissed, his face a mask of desperate fear. "I have to know what is out there." "Liam, no," Chloe cried, grabbing his arm. "Do not go down there." "I am not going to open the door," he said, shaking her off. "I just need to look. There is a peephole." He grabbed his phone, its flashlight beam cutting a frantic, trembling path ahead of him as he ran for the stairs. Maya shouted his name, but he did not stop. Ben let out a terrified moan. Against her better judgment, Chloe followed him. She could not let him go down there alone. The humming was louder on the stairs, the vibration more intense. It felt like standing inside a giant tuning fork. The rhythmic rattling of the door handle grew louder as they descended, a clear, terrifying message. "Let me in." They reached the ground floor. The rattling was deafening now. The entire iron door seemed to shudder with each deliberate jiggle of the handle. Liam crept towards it, his back pressed against the curved stone wall. His breathing was shallow, ragged. He held his phone up, the light illuminating the small, brass-rimmed peephole in the center of the door. He hesitated for a second, his knuckles white where he gripped the phone. He took a deep, shuddering breath. Then he leaned forward and put his eye to the hole. Chloe watched him, her own heart frozen in her chest. She saw his body go rigid. A tiny strangled sound escaped his throat. He was utterly still for a count of 3, 5, 10 seconds. It felt like an eternity. Then he stumbled backwards, away from the door, a hand clapped over his mouth. His eyes were wide, unseeing, filled with a horror so absolute it seemed to have scoured him clean of all other emotion. He tripped over his own feet and fell heavily to the stone floor. He just lay there shaking, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. At the exact moment he looked away from the peephole, the rattling stopped. The humming in the stone walls stopped. Everything went utterly, profoundly silent. "Liam, what did you see?" Chloe whispered, her voice trembling so badly she could barely form the words. He did not answer. He just shook his head, a violent, repetitive motion. He started to make a sound, a low, guttural noise from deep in his chest. The sound of a man trying to scream but whose lungs have forgotten how. Suddenly, a new sound broke the silence. It came from directly outside the door, so close it felt like it was in the room with them. It was a wet, sucking sound, a sound of release, of something pulling itself away from the iron. It was followed by a heavy, syrupy dripping. Something was leaking. Chloe had to know. Terror warred with a morbid, desperate need to understand what they were facing. While Liam was still a crumpled, shuddering heap on the floor, she crept forward. She took a breath, held it, and peered through the peephole. At first, she saw nothing. The lens was obscured by something thick and semi-translucent, like smeared Vaseline. It was streaked with a dark, oily liquid that dripped slowly down the outside of the door. As she watched, a section of the slime began to retract, and for a single, heart-stopping second, she saw through it, into the fog beyond. She did not see a face. She did not see a monster. She saw an eye. It was not a human eye. It was vast, round, and lidless, the size of a dinner plate. The iris was a milky, phosphorescent white, and it swirled with a slow, hypnotic inner light. The pupil was a black slit, a vertical slice of pure nothingness that seemed to drink the light from her phone. It was not looking at the door. It was looking in. It was looking directly at her. She did not scream. The sound was trapped in her throat, a solid ball of ice. She threw herself backwards, scrambling away from the door on her hands and knees, her mind a whiteout of pure animal terror. That is when the lights went out. The entire tower was plunged into an absolute suffocating blackness. Her phone flashlight, Liam's phone flashlight, the dim emergency lights on the stairs, everything died at once. The only light that remained was the great sweeping beam from the lantern room high above. It sliced through the darkness, sweeping past the barred windows on the ground floor, strobing the cavernous space with a terrifying rhythmic pulse of white light and black shadow. And in that first strobing flash of light, Chloe saw that the thick iron bolt on the door was no longer fully seated. The intense rhythmic rattling had shaken it loose. It had slid back an inch, maybe two. It was no longer secure. A low, guttural laugh echoed from the other side of the door. It was a wet, bubbling sound, like a drowning man trying to speak. It knew it was getting in. Then, from the darkness above them, from the living room, came Maya's scream. It was not a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated agony. And it was cut short with a sickening final crunch. The scream was a blade in the darkness, Maya's scream. It was sharp, high, and full of a pain so absolute it transcended fear. Then came the crunch, a sound like a thick branch snapping under a heavy boot, wet and final. And then silence, a silence so profound, so heavy, it was a physical weight. It crushed the air from Chloe's lungs. For a frozen eternity, she and Liam remained on the cold stone floor of the entrance hall. The world was reduced to a terrifying strobing pulse. A sweep of brilliant white light from the lantern above illuminated the terror on Liam's vacant face and the 2 inches of exposed metal where the bolt had slipped. Then a crushing, absolute blackness filled with the ghost of the scream. Light, dark, light, dark. The lighthouse had become the frantic, terrified heartbeat of their world. The horror at the door was forgotten. The bubbling laugh, the monstrous eye, the unseated bolt, all of it was eclipsed by the sound that had come from above, from where their friends were. A threat outside is one thing. A threat that is already inside, upstairs, in the dark with the people you love, is another thing entirely. Maya, Chloe breathed, the name a ragged puff of air in the cold. Liam did not respond. He was gone, retreated to some deep, unreachable place behind his eyes. He lay on the floor, curled in on himself, his body trembling with a ceaseless silent quake. He was broken. A cold, clear certainty cut through Chloe's panic. She was alone. Liam was useless, a dead weight. Ben and Maya. She could not think about it. She could not afford to. She had to move. She had to know. Liam, get up, she hissed, her voice a raw scrape. She crawled over to him in the strobing darkness, grabbing the front of his jacket. We have to go upstairs, now. He just moaned, a low animal sound. His eyes were wide but unfocused. The strobing light revealed the spiral staircase, a black helix ascending into the source of the nightmare. Every instinct screamed at her to stay put, to press herself into a corner and wait for the dawn. But the thought of Ben, of what might be happening to him, was a greater terror. She had to go up. "I cannot leave you here," she said, more to herself than to him. She slapped his cheek, a sharp, cracking sound that echoed in the stone chamber. "Liam, look at me." His eyes flickered, a sliver of awareness. "The eye," he mumbled, his voice thick. "It saw me." "I know. I saw it too," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "But Maya needs us. Ben needs us. Get up." Another sweep of light, another wave of darkness. In the next flash she saw a wet, dark stain spreading on the stone floor around Liam's legs. He had wet himself. The sight, so pathetic and human, somehow hardened her resolve. Fear was a luxury. She got to her feet, her legs unsteady. She hauled Liam up by his collar, his dead weight a staggering burden. He stumbled, leaning against her, his breath coming in shallow, hitching gasps. "Upstairs," she commanded, pushing him toward the iron steps. "Move." The ascent was a journey through hell. The strobing was disorienting, turning the curved staircase into a dizzying, shifting trap. In the flashes of light, the shadows cast by the iron spindles writhed like grasping tentacles. In the moments of blackness, Chloe imagined she could feel a cold breath on the back of her neck and hear a wet slick of movement on the steps behind them. She pushed Liam from behind, her hands on his back, forcing him upward one agonizing step at a time. The air grew thick, and a new smell reached them, coppery and sharp beneath the salt and damp. The smell of blood made Chloe's stomach churn. She bit down hard on her lip, the sharp pain a small grounding anchor. "Do not be sick, do not fall apart." They reached the landing of the second floor. The circular living room was a pit of absolute blackness, punctuated by the same rhythmic sweeping glare from the windows. The light would rake across the room, illuminating it in stark, terrifying detail for a second before plunging it back into shadow. "Ben?" Chloe called out, her voice a frail thread. "Maya." The only answer was the lonely howl of the wind outside. Leaning the near catatonic Liam against the wall of the stairwell, Chloe took a step into the room. Her foot kicked something that skittered across the floor. In the next flash of light she saw it was a small wooden house from the Catan game. The whole board had been overturned, the pieces scattered like broken teeth. Light. She saw the rough wooden table, one leg snapped, tilted at a crazy angle. Dark. The silence pressed in. Light. She saw the sofa, its cushions torn, the stuffing spilling out like entrails. Dark. She heard a dripping sound, slow, heavy, light. She saw the source of the dripping. Her mind broke just for a second. A silent internal scream threatened to tear her apart. Maya was there. She was crumpled at the base of the far wall beneath one of the large curved windows. Her body was twisted in a way that defied anatomy, her limbs bent at angles that bone should not allow. Her head was thrown back, her neck clearly and horribly broken. That was the crunch. Her eyes were open, wide with a final frozen moment of agony and disbelief. A dark pool was spreading out from under her on the stone floor. The keeper's logbook lay near her hand, its pages stained a dark, glistening crimson. There was no sign of Ben. The space beside Maya, where he had been cowering, was empty. Utterly empty. Chloe clamped a hand over her own mouth, bile rising hot and fast in her throat. She stumbled back, choking it down, her eyes fixed on the horrific tableau. The sweeping light was a merciless interrogator, revealing the scene again and again, burning the image into her brain. Maya, broken, gone. Ben, just gone. As the beam swept past again, it illuminated the window above Maya's body. Chloe saw how it had happened. The thick, reinforced glass was shattered. However, it had not been smashed inward. It was bulged, stretched, as if something immensely hot or powerful had pushed its way through from the outside. The edges of the broken pane were melted, drooping like warm toffee, coating the entire window frame. Dripping down onto the wall and onto Maya's still form was the same foul, translucent slime she had seen on the peephole. Greasy, iridescent and pulsing with a faint internal luminescence of its own. It had not needed the door, it had come through the window. 30 feet up, it had reached in and taken them. It had taken Maya, and it had taken Ben. A wave of violent shudders racked Chloe's body. A low moan escaped her lips. She looked back at Liam, who was sliding down the wall in the stairwell, his eyes blissfully closed, passed out from the terror. For a searing moment she envied him. But adrenaline is a powerful, savage drug. As the horror crested, a new cold wave of pure survival instinct washed over her. She could not stay here. This room was a tomb. The creature had breached it once. It could breach it again. The broken window was a gaping wound, an open invitation. And the thing that had come through it, where was it now? Was it still in the tower? Was Ben's disappearance an abduction, or had it simply taken its meal elsewhere? The humming started again, the low bone-deep thrumming song from the stones. It was fainter this time, more distant, but it was there, a sound of satisfaction, a post-meal lullaby. Chloe's eyes darted around the strobing room, her mind racing. Downstairs was not an option. The door was compromised, and the thing was outside. This floor was a death trap that left only one direction, up. The spiral staircase continued its ascent into the darkness above, towards the lamp, towards the roof. It was the highest, most defensible point. There was a heavy iron door leading into the lantern room. She had seen it when she and Liam went up before. If they could get in there, barricade that door, they might last until morning. Until Henderson came. Sunday, a lifetime away. First, she needed Liam. She could not carry him. She had to wake him. She stumbled back to the stairwell, her feet crunching on scattered game pieces. She knelt beside him and slapped him again, harder this time. Liam, wake up, damn you. His eyes fluttered open. They were glassy, but they focused on her face. Chloe, we have to go. We have to go up, she said, her voice urgent, pulling at his arms. It got in. It took them. Maya is gone. Liam. Ben is gone. It came through the window. He stared at her, his expression slack with incomprehension. Then his gaze drifted past her, into the living room. The lighthouse beam made its sweep. For a full second, he had a clear, unobstructed view of what had happened to Maya. The sound he made was inhuman. A high, keening wail of such pure, undiluted grief and horror that it seemed to tear his throat raw. It was the sound of a soul being ripped in two. He scrambled away from the sight, crab walking backwards up the stairs, his eyes squeezed shut, his hands clamped over his ears. No, 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 he chanted, the word losing all meaning, becoming just a noise, a rhythm of denial. His hysteria gave him strength. He was moving at least. Chloe scrambled after him, herding him up the stairs. Keep going, all the way to the top. They climbed into the suffocating darkness of the tower's upper levels. This section was unfinished, just bare, weeping stone and the echoing metal of the stairs. The smell of ozone and machinery grew stronger. The grinding of the lamp mechanism above them was a constant, deafening presence. Light, dark, light, dark. The world dissolved into a nauseating strobe effect. They reached the final landing, a small circular platform outside a heavy iron door, identical to the one on the ground floor, the lantern room. Safety. The bolt, Chloe gasped, fumbling for the handle. We have to bolt it. She pushed the door open and shoved the still moaning Liam inside. The lantern room was a cage of glass and brass, dominated by the huge, slowly rotating lens. The mechanism groaned and hummed, a monstrous metal heart. The light it cast was blinding up close, sweeping the interior with a relentless, disorienting glare. Chloe turned back to the door. It had a bolt, just like the one below. She put her hands on it, her fingers numb, her muscles screaming with effort. It was just as stiff, just as rusted. She threw her entire body weight against it. It did not budge. Liam. She screamed over the noise of the lamp. He was huddled in a corner, as far from the glass as he could get, rocking back and forth. He was useless. She tried again, her breath sobbing in her chest, her palms raw. It moved, a fraction of an inch, with a high-pitched metallic scream of protest. She put her shoulder into it, grunting, pushing with the last of her strength. It was moving, slowly, so slowly. Halfway there, that is when she heard it. It came from below, from the blood-soaked living room they had just fled. It was a sound that should not have been possible. It was a voice. Maya's voice. It was faint, distorted, echoing up the spiral stairwell. But it was unmistakably her. Soft, plaintive, weak. Chloe. The voice whispered. It hurts. Chloe, where did you go? Please, help me. Chloe froze, her hands still on the bolt, every muscle in her body locked. It could not be. She had seen Maya. She had seen the angle of her neck, the lifeless stare in her eyes. She was dead. She was gone. Do not leave me. Maya's voice echoed up the stairs, closer now, imbued with a pathetic, heartbreaking sob. It is so dark. I am scared. Chloe. It was a trick. It had to be a trick. A mimicry. A lure. The creature, the thing with the single, vast eye, was down there, and it was wearing her friend's voice like a mask. It was trying to draw her back down. She closed her eyes, tears of terror and grief streaming down her face. She imagined Maya, broken on the floor. She imagined the voice crawling out of her dead throat. With a final, agonized scream of her own, she threw herself against the bolt. It slammed home with a deafening final boom. They were locked in, and from the bottom of the stairwell, the voice changed. The pitiful, pleading tone vanished. It was replaced by a low, guttural chuckle. The same wet, bubbling laugh she had heard from outside the door, and then it spoke again, no longer mimicking Maya, but with its own voice, a deep, resonant whisper that vibrated through the very stone of the tower. "Good choice," it said. "It is so much more fun when you run." The creature's whisper slithered up the stairwell and coiled itself in the suffocating air of the lantern room. It was a promise of pain, a vow of leisurely, drawn-out terror. The final, deafening clang of the bolt was not an act of defiance, but merely the ringing of a bell to signal the start of the real game. Chloe fell back from the door, her body trembling, every muscle screaming in protest. She scrambled away, putting as much distance as she could between herself and the iron barrier, her back hitting the central column of the lens mechanism. The machine was a beast of brass and glass, its gears grinding with a relentless, deafening rhythm. The heat wash from the massive bulb was intense, drying the tears on her face. The room was a cage, a glass cage at the pinnacle of the world, offering a panoramic view of a swirling white nothingness. The relentless sweeping beam of the lamp was their only reality, a scythe of pure light that sliced through the fog again and again. It made Chloe feel utterly exposed, a specimen pinned to a board for observation. For the first time she understood the keeper's frantic scrawl, "It sees me through the light." They were not using the light to see out. It was being used to see in. Liam was a wreck. He had uncurled himself from his corner and was now pressed against the glass panels, his forehead leaving a greasy smear. He was not looking down, but up, at the rotating assembly above his head. His eyes were wide, fixated on the giant, multifaceted lens as it turned. "It sings," he whispered, his voice a lost, reedy sound almost swallowed by the mechanical grinding. "The light, it has a voice." "Liam, stop it," Chloe snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. "Get away from the glass." He did not seem to hear her. He was mesmerized, his gaze following the slow, majestic turn of the lens. "It is so bright, it burns the shadows away." A floorboard creaked on the stairs below them. Chloe froze, her blood turning to ice water. It was a single, deliberate sound, a testing of weight. It was coming up. It had laughed. It had taunted. And now it was climbing the last flight of stairs to their door. She pointed a shaking finger at the iron door. "Liam, it is here." He turned his head slowly, his eyes unfocused. He looked at the door, then back at the light, a flicker of a frown on his face, as if he were trying to solve a complex but ultimately uninteresting puzzle. The immediate physical threat seemed unable to penetrate the shell of his shock. Then came the scratching. It was not the sound of a fingernail. It was the harsh, grating scrape of something hard and chitinous against the iron. It drew a long, slow line down the length of the door, the sound setting Chloe's teeth on edge. It was like the screech of a giant insect, sharp and dry and utterly alien. A sound that did not belong to any creature of the deep she could imagine. "Liam," she screamed, her voice cracking with terror. "Help me barricade it." There was nothing in the room to use, no furniture, just the central lamp mechanism, the glass walls, and a small metal toolkit left on a shelf for the maintenance of the light. It contained a few wrenches and a heavy-duty hammer. It was better than nothing. The scratching stopped. It was replaced by a soft, wet thud against the door, and another, a slow, patient, rhythmic bumping, as if a great soft head were methodically knocking against the iron, testing its strength. "Ben?" A voice whispered from the other side of the door. It was Ben's voice. Chloe's heart seized. She had heard it mimic Maya. She knew this was a trick, but the sound of his voice, so full of confusion and fear, was a physical blow. "Chloe, Liam, are you in there? I got away. I ran." The voice pleaded, closer now, pressed right against the door. "It is gone. I think it is gone. Please, let me in. I am hurt." Chloe pressed her hands over her ears, shutting her eyes tight. "It is not him," she chanted under her breath. "It is not him. It is not him. I saw what it did to Maya." Ben's voice sobbed, a sound of such authentic, soul-deep grief that it tore through her defenses. "Oh God, Maya, please, Chloe, do not leave me out here with it. I can hear it moving around downstairs. Please." Liam stumbled away from the glass, his face a mask of conflict. "Ben?" he whispered. "No!" Chloe screamed at him. "Liam, look at me. It is a trap. It did the same thing with Maya's voice." The rhythmic bumping stopped. There was a long silence from the other side of the door. Even the wind outside seemed to die down, as if the world were holding its breath. Then Ben's voice spoke again, but it had changed. The fear was gone. The pleading was gone. It was replaced by a cold, flat monotone. "I know you are in there. I can smell you." The voice began to distort, to deepen, the human vowels stretching and pulling apart, melting into the low, vibrating hum they had heard from the stones. The mimicry was dissolving, revealing the true voice beneath. It was the sound of the abyss given speech, a resonant, terrifying drone that vibrated through the iron of the door and up through the floor. The song, the heavy, wet thudding against the door, began again, but faster this time, harder. It was no longer testing, it was attacking. Each impact made the thick iron shudder in its frame. The bolt, newly seated in its rusty groove, groaned in protest. Chloe scrambled for the toolkit. She grabbed the hammer, its weight a small, cold comfort in her hand. Liam had collapsed into a corner again, his hands over his ears, his body rocking back and forth in time with the impacts on the door. He was lost to her. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The relentless booming on the door, the grinding of the lamp, the howling of the wind, and Liam's pathetic, rhythmic moaning, all blended into a single, maddening symphony of terror. Chloe stood in the center of the room, the hammer held in a two-handed, white-knuckled grip, her wild eyes flitting between the shuddering door and the glass walls, waiting for the attack to come from a new direction. She did not know how long it lasted. Time had ceased to have meaning. There was only the siege. But eventually, the pounding on the door subsided. It did not stop abruptly, but rather seemed to lose interest, the impacts becoming slower, more sporadic, until finally they ceased altogether. Silence, no more whispers, no more scratching, no sound from the stairs at all. Chloe waited, her body coiled like a spring, every nerve screaming. Had it given up? Had it gone back downstairs? The silence was, in its own way, as terrifying as the assault. The great lighthouse beam continued its inexorable sweep. Out into the fog, back across the glass. Light, dark, light, dark. As the beam swept across the northern arc of the lantern room, something changed. For a fraction of a second, the light was obscured. A vast shadow was projected onto the swirling fog, a monstrous silhouette that blotted out the beam. And then it was gone. Chloe's blood ran cold. It was not downstairs anymore. It had climbed. It was outside, on the narrow catwalk that encircled the lantern room. She crept toward the glass, her heart hammering a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. She timed her movements with the lamp, staying in the shadows, moving only when the beam was pointing away from her. She peered down, trying to see the metal walkway through the condensation and grime. She could see nothing but the swirling, impenetrable fog below. The lamp began its next rotation. Its blinding glare approached her section of the glass. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing herself. The light swept past her. Tap. The sound was tiny, infinitesimal, a sharp, distinct tap on the glass, not 2 feet from her face. Her eyes flew open. There was nothing there, just the fog, just the night. She must have imagined it. The strain was getting to her. She was starting to hear things. The beam came around again, sweeping, relentless. As it illuminated the panel directly in front of her, she saw it. A smear, a long, greasy smear of the same translucent, phosphorescent slime trailing down the outside of the thick glass, and at the bottom of the smear, clinging to the metal frame of the window, was a hand, or something like a hand. It was long and skeletal, with far too many joints in its slender fingers. The skin was a pale, greyish white, like the belly of a dead fish, and it seemed to shimmer with its own faint internal light. It had no fingernails, but tapered to sharp black points of what looked like obsidian or chitin. A thin, translucent webbing stretched between the fingers, perforated and torn in places. It was clinging to the outside of their cage. Chloe choked back a scream, stumbling backward and falling over one of Liam's outstretched legs. He did not even notice. He was still rocking and still humming to himself, lost in his own private nightmare. The tapping started again, a patient and curious sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from all around them now. One tap to the north, another to the west. It was circling. It was walking around the narrow catwalk, 30 stories in the air, in the middle of a storm, tapping on the glass, examining its prey. The sheer, alien confidence of it was more terrifying than any roaring monster. And then it stopped. The tapping ceased. There was a long, drawn-out scraping sound, and then a wet, heavy shifting. The beam swept around, and it was there. Pressed against the glass, it blotted out the fog, a shape of pure nightmare illuminated in the full, unforgiving glare of the lighthouse lamp. Chloe saw the eye first, the same vast, lidless, milky white eye she had seen in the peephole. It stared into the room, its vertical slit of a pupil dilating slowly as it adjusted to the light. The creature's head was long and narrow, like some abyssal fish, its skin pale and semi-translucent, revealing a dark tracery of veins beneath. It had no discernible nose, just 2 vertical slits that flared slightly. Its mouth, a wide, lipless gash below the eye, was closed, but it seemed to curve in a perpetual, hideous smile. The rest of its body was a confusion of long, gaunt limbs and glistening, pale flesh. It was impossibly tall, its stooped shoulders level with the top of the glass panels. It was clinging to the outside of the tower with those terrifying, multi-jointed hands, its form both skeletal and horribly fluid. It stared in, not at Liam, who was rocking in the corner, but right at Chloe. It saw her, it held her gaze, and as the blinding lamp continued to rotate away, plunging the room back into strobing darkness, the single great eye of the creature did not fade. It held the light. It began to glow with its own phosphorescent swirling energy, a lone malevolent moon hanging in the blackness, watching her. The creature raised one of its long skeletal hands. Slowly, deliberately, it pressed its sharp black fingertips against the glass. It did not tap. It began to draw a line. A high-pitched, agonizing screech filled the room as the sharp points bit into the reinforced glass, leaving a deep white scratch. It was drawing a circle on the glass, right where Chloe stood. It was marking its entry point. And as it drew, the glass around the scratch began to glow with a faint, orange heat. Just like the window downstairs, it was beginning to melt. The screech of the creature's claw on the glass was the sound of the world being torn open. It was a high, thin shriek of tormented atoms, a sound that vibrated in Chloe's bones and promised a violation far worse than mere death. The circle it drew was hideously perfect. As the obsidian-like tip completed the loop, the faint orange glow it left behind intensified, spreading like a fever through the thick, reinforced pane. The glass, designed to withstand hurricane-force winds and the impact of rogue waves, began to sweat. Chloe was paralyzed. The hammer in her hands felt as useless as a child's toy. What could she do? Strike the glass and hasten its collapse? swing this pathetic piece of metal at a creature that had climbed a 30-story stone tower in a storm. She was a mouse in a jar, watching a needle-sharp beak peck its way through the lid. The room grew hotter. The familiar, dry heat of the lamp was now joined by a blistering, focused intensity from the glass panel. The smell of ozone and hot metal was overpowered by something new, the acrid stench of melting silica and a foul, underlying scent of low tide and decay, the creature's own putrid perfume. The center of the scored circle began to sag. It drooped inward, losing its rigidity, becoming a viscous, shimmering membrane of molten glass. It glowed a dull, angry red. The creature watched the process with its single, unblinking eye, a luminous, swirling orb of patient malevolence. It seemed to be in no hurry. The slow, inevitable breach was part of the hunt, a way of savoring her terror. "It burns," a voice whispered beside her. Chloe flinched violently, spinning around. Liam was on his feet. The rocking and moaning had stopped. His eyes were no longer vacant and lost, but sharp with a terrifying, feverish intelligence. He was not looking at the melting glass. He was staring, utterly transfixed, at the massive rotating Fresnel lens in the center of the room. "Liam," she breathed, a desperate flicker of hope igniting in her chest. "Liam, we have to do something." "The song is in the glass," he said, his voice flat and didactic, as if explaining a simple scientific principle. He took a shuffling step towards the central mechanism. "The big glass. It focuses the song. It sings the shadows away." He was still broken, not catatonic, but repurposed by his madness. His mind had fixated on the light as the source, the cause, the everything. He saw the monster at the window not as an attacker, but as a symptom. The true enemy, in his fractured reality, was the lamp. The molten circle of glass drooped further, stretching into a grotesque, glowing tear. The creature outside shifted its immense weight, the metal of the catwalk groaning in protest. It lowered its narrow, piscine head, bringing its single eye level with the sagging pane. It stared through the heat shimmer at Chloe, and its lipless mouth stretched wider, a hideous, silent laugh. It raised one of its long, webbed hands and pushed a single, black-tipped finger into the molten glass. There was a soft, sickening hiss, like a wet log being tossed onto a fire. The finger slid through the viscous material as if it were water, then another finger and another, until the entire hand was inside. The air in the room was now thick with its stench. That was the breaking point. The sight of that alien hand, pale and skeletal, emerging from a wound of molten glass into their sanctuary, severed the last thread of Chloe's paralysis. A wave of pure, primal rage surged through her, a ferocious refusal to simply stand there and be slaughtered. "Get back," she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. She charged forward, swinging the hammer in a wide, desperate arc. She did not aim for the hand. She aimed for the glass beside it, hoping to shatter the panel, to do something to stop the slow, torturous entry. The hammerhead connected with the thick, heated pane with a deafening, percussive crack. It was like hitting solid rock. The impact jarred her arms to the sockets, and the hammer was nearly wrenched from her grasp. The glass did not shatter. It did not even crack. A small, star-shaped fracture, no bigger than her fist, appeared where the hammer had struck, but the panel held. It was immensely strong. It was only the creature's strange thermal power that could defeat it. The creature did not even flinch. It continued to push its way through the molten opening, its long, slender arm following its hand. The glowing eye fixed on her, and the deep, vibrating hum, the song of the stones, started again, resonating not from below, but from the creature's own chest. It was a sound of amusement. Suddenly, Liam moved. Hurch, he did not run at the creature or the window. He ran at the lamp. With a wild, guttural cry, he threw himself at the central rotating mechanism. "Stop the singing," he shrieked. "Make it quiet." He grabbed one of the thick brass struts of the lens assembly, his body's momentum fighting against the immense, grinding torque of the motor. The gears screamed in protest, a high-pitched metallic shriek that eclipsed the sound of the wind and the creature's hum. For a second, the rotation slowed. The effect on the creature was instantaneous and astonishing. As the rotation of the lamp faltered, the main beam, a blade of light so intense it was almost a solid object, lingered for a fraction of a second longer on the creature's head, and the creature reacted. It recoiled violently, pulling its arm back from the molten opening with a wet, sucking sound. It threw its other hand up to shield its eye, and for the first time it made a noise, a true noise, a chittering, agonized shriek that was 1,000 times worse than its mimicry. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated pain, the light, the focused, concentrated beam of the lamp. It hurt it. "Do not let the light go out." The keeper's words were not a warning about the darkness. They were instructions for a weapon. Liam's weight was not enough to stop the machine. The gears caught again, and the lens resumed its steady, inexorable rotation. The beam swept away, and the creature, its shrieking subsiding to a low, angry hiss, immediately pressed forward again, its eye glowing with renewed malevolence. But Chloe had seen. She finally understood. "Liam, you are right," she screamed, her voice filled with a wild, desperate hope. "We have to stop it. Jam the gears." She looked around the room frantically, the toolkit. She scrambled to the shelf, her fingers fumbling over the heavy wrenches. She grabbed the largest one, a thick, meter-long piece of steel. It was heavy, unwieldy. The creature was pushing its way back through the opening, its head and one skeletal shoulder now emerging from the molten glass. It was halfway in. Its gaze was no longer fixed on Chloe, but on Liam, who was still clinging pathetically to the lens assembly. It recognized him as the source of its pain. "Together," Chloe yelled, running toward the mechanism. Liam seemed to find a new surge of strength from her words. He wedged his foot against the base of the machine and pulled, his muscles straining, his face contorted in a mask of crazed effort. The rotation slowed again, the gears groaning, metal grinding on metal. Chloe saw her chance. In the base of the machine, below the rotating lens, was the main drive gear, a thick, toothed wheel of iron as big as a car tire. It turned slowly, powerfully, meshing with a smaller pinion gear that drove the entire assembly. If she could jam that, the rotation would stop dead. As Liam slowed the rotation, a small gap opened up between the teeth of the main gear. It was now or never. "Let go," she screamed. Liam, understanding, threw himself clear. Chloe, with a final, desperate prayer, thrust the heavy steel wrench into the gears. The sound was apocalyptic. There was a catastrophic, deafening bang that shook the entire room. The wrench, caught between the immense torque of the motor and the irresistible inertia of the lens, was bent into a U-shape in a fraction of a second. A shower of sparks erupted from the mechanism. The pinion gear, unable to turn, shattered, its iron teeth exploding like shrapnel across the room. The main drive gear locked in place with a final shuddering groan, and the light stopped moving. It had stopped at the perfect, impossible moment. The great focused beam was pointing directly at the window where the creature was coming through, bathing it in a torrent of pure, concentrated, weaponized light. The effect was absolute. The creature caught halfway through the molten opening convulsed as if it had been struck by lightning. It threw its head back and let out a single deafening, soul-shattering shriek. Its pale, translucent skin began to smoke, then to blister, the flesh boiling away from the bone, the great milky eye the source of its power, and its vision turned black. It cooked in its socket, bursting with a wet, explosive pop that sprayed a foul, steaming liquid across the inside of the glass. Blinded and burning, the creature thrashed wildly, its long, flailing limbs smashing against the lantern glass. It was a being of the absolute, crushing dark of the abyss. This much light, this much focused energy, was a poison to it. It was like dousing a fire with gasoline. The creature's shriek turned into a gurgling, bubbling roar. With a final, convulsive spasm, it tore itself backward, ripping its body out of the molten glass, leaving behind strips of its own cooked flesh still sizzling in the opening. There was a tremendous crash of breaking glass and twisting metal from outside as its immense dying body fell from the catwalk and plunged into the swirling fog below. For a moment, there was silence, a stunned, ringing silence, broken only by the hum of the still burning lamp and the frantic, ragged sound of Chloe's own breathing. It was over. They had done it. They had won. She turned to Liam, a wild, incredulous laugh bubbling in her throat. "We did it," she gasped. "Liam, we actually did it." He was standing a few feet away, his back to her, looking at the now stationary beam of light as it cut a perfect, unwavering path into the fog. "It is quiet now," he whispered. He sounded calm, sane even. I stopped the song, then he turned around, and Chloe's victory laugh died in her throat, replaced by a strangled sob of horror. One of the iron teeth from the shattered pinion gear, a jagged shard of metal the size of a dagger, had been thrown clear in the explosion. It had flown across the room and embedded itself deep in Liam's chest. A dark, wet stain was spreading rapidly across the front of his shirt. He looked down at the shard of metal protruding from his sternum with a look of mild, detached surprise. "Oh," he said softly. Then his eyes rolled up into his head, and he collapsed to the floor in a heap. Chloe rushed to his side, falling to her knees. "Liam. No, no, no." His breathing was a shallow, wet rattle. His eyes fluttered, trying to focus on her face. "Chloe," he whispered, a trickle of blood appearing at the corner of his mouth. "The light, it is so bright." His body gave a final shuddering tremor, and then he was still. Chloe stayed there for a long time, kneeling in the silent, glaringly lit room, her hand resting on Liam's cooling chest. She was alone, truly alone, surrounded by the dead. The silence was absolute. The grinding of the gears, the howling of the wind, the moaning of her friend, it was all gone. There was only the steady, silent hum of the lamp. But the creature was dead. The threat was gone. She was safe until morning. It was this thought that allowed her to finally push herself to her feet. She had to get out of this room. She could not stay here with Liam's body. She had to go back down. She had to wait for Henderson, wait for the dawn. With one last look at the friend who had saved her, she turned to the heavy iron door. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grasp the thick metal handle of the bolt. It was stiff, wedged tight from the force of her terrified push. She pulled, grunting with effort, her muscles weak and trembling. With an agonizing screech of metal on metal, the bolt slid back. She pulled the heavy door open and stepped out onto the landing of the spiral staircase. She was immediately plunged into a thick, profound darkness, a blackness made even more absolute by the brilliant, unwavering light still pouring from the lantern room behind her. She took one step down, then another. From the suffocating darkness at the bottom of the stairwell, a voice whispered. It was a voice she knew. It was Ben's voice. It was no longer mimicking or pleading. It was laughing, a soft, low, gurgling chuckle that was filled with an ancient and unspeakable hunger. "Silly girl," the voice chuckled from the abyss below. "Did you really think there was only one?" The laugh that echoed up from the bottom of the world was not a sound of mirth. It was a wet, guttural, bubbling noise, the sound of a predator that has cornered its prey and knows the game is over. It wore Ben's voice like a stolen coat, a coat that was too small, stretched and distorted at the seams. Every resonant, hateful syllable was a shovel full of dirt on the grave of Chloe's hope. "Did you really think there was only one?" The words hung in the profound, consuming darkness of the stairwell. Behind her, the lantern room was a silent, unwavering beacon of brilliant, useless light. Before her was an abyss, and the abyss was laughing. Then came the sounds, a soft, wet scraping on the stone floor far below, the distinct, dry clatter of a chitinous claw on the first iron step of the spiral staircase. And it was not one sound, but many, a chorus of slick, stealthy movements, a stealth that was born not of fear, but of arrogance. They were coming up, all of them. Chloe's body, which had felt like a hollowed-out husk of lead, was suddenly electric. There was no thought, no strategy, no grief. There was only a single, screaming imperative that drowned out everything else. "Close the door." She threw herself backward, stumbling back over the threshold into the blinding glare of the lantern room. Her hands found the thick iron of the door, her fingers raw and clumsy. She pulled, her entire body straining, putting every last ounce of her terror-fueled strength into the motion. The heavy door groaned, resisting, its hinges screaming in the sudden dead silence of the tower. Leaving so soon? Ben's voice purred from the darkness, much closer now. It was halfway up the first flight. The party is just getting started. We have so much to show you. A new sound joined the scraping, a low multi-toned humming. The song of the stones, but this was no solo performance. It was a choir, a deep, resonant harmony of resonant evil that vibrated up the iron spine of the staircase. The door was moving, scraping across the stone floor, halfway closed. Chloe's muscles burned. Her lungs felt ready to burst. She could hear them clearly now, a swift, skittering ascent. They were impossibly fast. You smell so much better when you are afraid, the voice whispered. It was just below the landing now. Any second, a head, a hand, would appear around the curve of the stairs. With a final, agonized sob of effort, Chloe heaved the door into its frame. Her hand fumbled for the bolt, the huge cold block of iron. She pushed. It resisted, stiff and unyielding. And then the door shuddered, struck by an immense force from the other side. A deep, resounding boom that vibrated through her bones. A pale, skeletal hand, identical to the one she had seen before, shot through the closing gap near the floor, its black-tipped fingers scrabbling for purchase. There you are, the voice hissed, no longer sounding like Ben, but like something ancient and vast. Right on the other side of the door, Chloe screamed. It was not a scream of fear, but of pure feral rage. She ignored the hand, ignored the voice. She put her shoulder, her head, her entire being into the bolt. She pushed, and the image of Maya's broken body, of Liam's surprised and final breath, of Ben's stolen laugh, flashed behind her eyes, fueling her with the strength of the damned. The bolt slammed home with the sound of a guillotine. It was met by a wet, sickening crunch and a high-pitched, chittering shriek of agony from the other side. The pale hand, caught between the door and the thick iron frame, was severed. It dropped to the floor inside the lantern room with a soft, final thud, the dismembered fingers curling and uncurling in a series of dying spasms. The shrieking from the landing outside was cut short, replaced by a furious, guttural hiss, and then the sound of something heavy and large retreating back down the stairs. Chloe collapsed against the door, her body sliding down to the floor. She stared at the twitching, dismembered hand. It was grey-white, webbed, and slowly dissolving at the wrist into a puddle of greasy, phosphorescent slime. She was safe. She was locked in. She was alive. She sat there for an unmeasured eternity, her back pressed against the cold iron, listening. The sounds of movement from the stairwell faded, replaced by the profound humming silence of the tower. The severed hand on the floor stopped twitching and melted completely, leaving nothing but a foul-smelling iridescent stain. Slowly, shakily, Chloe pushed herself to her feet. The room was just as she had left it. The unwavering beam of the lamp cut a hole in the night. Liam's body lay in a still silent heap near the shattered mechanism. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burnt alien flesh. She was a prisoner in her sanctuary. The single, static beam of light was both her weapon and the bars of her cage. It protected the area it touched, but the rest of the tower, the other 300 degrees of the compass, were cloaked in shadow. They were out there, waiting. She had to see. She had to know what she was up against. Her legs felt like they were moving through water as she crossed the room to the glass panels. She stayed away from the molten, gaping hole where the first one had broken through, its edges still glowing a faint, angry red. She approached the panels on the opposite side, the side that looked out into the pure, featureless darkness, untouched by the lamp's protective glare. She pressed her face close to the cold glass, peering out into the swirling fog and the blackness of the sea. At first, she saw nothing. Just the night, the endless, empty night. She almost allowed herself a moment of relief. Maybe they had gone. Maybe the one she had injured had driven the others away. Then she saw it. A flicker of light where no light should be. It was faint, a tiny pinprick of phosphorescence in the deep swirling grey. She focused on it, her breath misting the glass. It was an eye. A single, vast, milky white eye, floating in the darkness about 20 yards out from the tower. It was just hanging there in the air, watching her. As her own eyes adjusted, she saw the faint skeletal shape attached to it. It was clinging to the sheer rock face of the island, just below the tower's foundation. Then another light blinked into existence to the left of the first one, and another to the right, and a fourth, higher up, near the base of the lighthouse itself. They were not on the catwalk. They were clinging to the stone of the tower, their pale, spidery limbs finding purchase on the slick, weeping rock. Their great single eyes, all glowing with a cold, dead light, were all fixed on her, the lone human survivor in the glass cage at the top. They were not attacking. They did not need to. The sun would not rise for another 6 hours. Henderson was not due until the afternoon. They were creatures of the deep, of crushing pressures and eternal patience. They had all the time in the world. They would simply wait for her to make a mistake, wait for her to die of thirst, wait for her to go mad. Chloe stumbled back from the glass, a low, guttural sound escaping her own throat. It was not a sob or a scream. It was a sound of ultimate, absolute despair. She had not won. She had merely survived to be the last one to die. She was the final course in a long and terrible feast. She slid down to the floor, her back against the warm, humming brass of the lamp's central column. She drew her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them, making herself as small as possible. She looked at Liam's body, then at the iridescent stain where the severed hand had melted. She looked back at the glass, at the silent, watching eyes in the fog. She did not cry. She was past tears. She was in a place beyond fear, beyond hope. A cold, clear, silent certainty settled over her. This was how her story ended. She would die here, in this glass cage, under the unblinking stare of the silent, unmoving light and the patient, hungry gaze of the things that had come out of the dark. The terror, she realized, was not in the dying. The terror was in the waiting, and she, Chloe, was the new keeper of the Black Maw Lighthouse, a silent watch over a sea of monsters, a prisoner until the light and her life finally went out.